Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here and share my family's history. And my parents were both raised in Millbury, Harry Arthur Pierce Bailey of 21 West Main and Angela Marie Mazzio of 104 North Main Street. And both families were involved in the Millbury community for much of the 20th century. What I'll do is begin with the Baileys first. So my great-grandparents, Harry Howard Bailey and Annie Keith Bailey, were high school sweethearts in Bellows Falls, Vermont, being denied twice to marry in Annie's Church of St. Charles because Harry was of the Protestant faith. They were married by the Justice of the Peace in 1898 and would have 7 children. Leverett, my grandfather, his sisters Frances, who died a quick death at 3 months of age, Edith, Dorothy, Alta, Gladys, and Mamie. Now remember those because I'm going to give you a test. As a young man, their father Harry was a mechanic repairman, and while working and standing on the exterior ceiling of an elevator stuck on the 3rd floor of a building, he noticed right away the cable that connected the coach was very loose. Within seconds it let go and the elevator and he fell, hitting the basement floor. Harry broke his back from the fall, and after months of recuperation and the need to support his large family, he again sought employment. It was 1911, and with tough economic times and little work available, his friend sought help from a connection in Millbury, and it was successful. With a job waiting, my great-grandparents moved their family to 25 South Main Street in Millbury. Harry would serve as a delivery man with horse and buggy, followed by gas-powered vehicles, and eventually working for the town of Millbury, the town highway department, as a truck driver for my maternal grandfather, Frank Mazzio, who was the highway superintendent. Harry and Annie's son, Leverett, my grandfather, worked at a livery stable near Main Street during his high school years and a machinist in Worcester during his adult years. His sister Edith and Gladys worked for Mrs. Fisher of Fisher's Cash Groceries in the Ducharme block on Main Street, across from the current pharmacy. Now, if you take a look, if you stand in the pharmacy parking lot and look across, it'll say Fisher's Cash Groceries, because the paint that was covering that was obviously poor because it's gone already. Yeah. But Fisher's Cash Groceries is still solid right behind there, and if you look today, you'll see that. They worked and became close friends with colleague Helen Connors O'Brien. Upon Mrs. Fisher's retirement, Helen continued the business, renaming it Helen's Kitchen, of course. The grocery store would transition into a bakery that became very popular in Millbury and surrounding towns. Upon Helen's retirement, my aunts, known in town as the Bailey Girls, were now in their 50s and felt it best to take on the business until their retirement. In doing so, sisters Mamie, who served as a librarian for the Millbury Public Library, would serve as part-time sales clerk, along with sisters Alta and Dorothy, who left their positions at F.W. Woolworth on Front Street in Worcester. It was now a family business. It was also hard work and time-consuming work, but all 5 sisters worked well together, lived together, and supported each other. Helen O'Brien, her sister-in-law Janet Connors, and I, during my junior and senior high school years, would assist as bakers on Saturdays and in preparation for holidays. During Thanksgiving and Christmas, 2 of the busiest seasons, 425 homemade pies, freshly baked, among numerous other pastry goods, including their favorite raspberry and lemon tarts, were all baked in gas ovens from the 1870s. And this was now 100 years later. My aunt supported local businesses, buying apples for pies from Stowe Farm Orchards. Barb Pearson of Pearson's Elmhurst Dairy would deliver milk and other dairy essentials. And for further baking necessities, Millbury's Market, Hilltop Market across the street, currently Walgreens, was a go-to place. My aunts retired in the 1970s, and the doors of the bakery would close for the last time, and Sturbridge Village would purchase all of the large pastry cases, cash register which never worked, scales and baking items that dated back to the mid-1800s. That's what they used. They never bought anything new. My aunts thought they took Sturbridge Village for a ride with the sale price. Anyone care to guess what they sold all of that equipment for? Anyone want to take a guess? It was back in the 70s. $200. And they thought they stole their money. And I will tell you too, that evening they did not drink at all. But that evening they were so happy and so giddy over the $200. My aunt went and bought what she called a bottle of Chablis Le Blanc. That's what she called it. You can tell they didn't do much of that. So my grandfather Leverett, their brother, would marry Mabel Pierce of North Main Street, Millbury. They would raise two children, my father Harry and his sister Elaine. And just recently, last week actually, Mabel's father, my great-grandfather William Pierce, was noted on the Millbury Historical Society Facebook page for receiving the Gold Cane in 1958 at 82 years of age. So I thank you for that. To close the Bailey history of Millbury, I'd like to bring you back to Annie's visit with her parish priest denying her request for marriage in the Catholic Church. Following their marriage with the Justice of the Peace, my great-grandmother Annie would never attend church again because of that. However, she would say her rosary every day. So when she was nearing death at the age of 83, she asked her daughters to call upon the pastor of St. Bridget's. When he arrived, Annie shared her story and followed with, "Father, I have failed my church, and I am so deeply sorry." And his response was, "No, Annie, you did not fail your church. Your church failed you." So you both raised a very hardworking and caring family. Rest assured, no regrets, Andy. And she passed in the early hours of the following morning. Now, to my mother's family, Angela, the Paletta and the Mazzios, and I have to add the Palettas because there'd be no Mazzios if there were no Palettas. The Palettas came first. So, my great-grandparents, Loretto Paletta and his wife, Elvira Grandinato Paletta, and children Maria, Anthony, who they called Tony, and Michael, left their home in Berea, Italy to start a new life in America. They first settled in Leicester, Massachusetts, where Teresa and Ida would be born. My grandmother's name was actually Aida, and she changed it to Ida because she wanted to Americanize her name. While searching for a town with an Italian neighborhood and an opportunity for a small grocery business, my great-grandfather Loretto found that 102-104 Main Street, Millbury, would support his dream. In 1907, he purchased the two-family home with a small building in the front yard, which would serve as his market. As the years passed, the small market would come down, and the barber shop across the street would serve for the store's growing needs. It would become Paletta's sure-fine grocery market, at which the family was most proud. Loretto traveled back and forth from the old country to bring goods for his store, and on one trip, he never returned, and that's a story for another time. Tony, his son, ran the store and also worked at the Felters Company. He and his brother Michael were talented violinists, really talented. He was an exceptional violinist, exceptional musician. And his sister Ida, my grandmother, was a pianist and organist. It was Tony's dream always to make a living as a musician. He auditioned for the Carnegie Hall Symphony in New York City, and he was hired for a full-time violinist position. On the last day at the Felters, he came home for lunch and told his beautiful wife, Maria, to have their children, Elvira, Rita, Giulio, and Joe, ready to leave their home, which was the side of the market, and take the long drive to New York City, where the new apartment would be. When the Felters whistle blew at the end of the workday, Tony shut his machine off and began his last cleaning. Sadly, another employee backed into the switch, accidentally turning on the machine, and Tony lost all his fingers on his left hand, the same day he was heading for New York. New York was out, and he would never play again. However, what he would do, he bought the first school bus for the town of Millbury, and he drove it himself, taking those kids that lived at a distance back and forth to school. Made it easier for them. He also remained at the store. His daughter Elvira's son, Joe Conti Jr., fulfilled his dream. He was an exceptional full-time violinist for the Boston Symphony and the Boston Pops. The Plata boys, Julio and Joe, would become great Millbury High athletes, with Joe receiving a football scholarship to Columbia. I just wanted to add this. Elvira's son, Joey Jr., who played in the Boston Symphony, her husband was also a musician. He was a conductor for the Providence Symphony and the Providence Youth Symphony. And when Pavarotti came to perform at the Centrum, which is now the DCU Center, his conductor became sick the night before and was not able to conduct the program. So they were scurrying around to find a name who could conduct. And Joe Conti's name came up, Elvira Paleta's husband. So Pavarotti called him personally. He said, "I'm stuck, can you help me?" Joe drove right up from Providence, met with him in Worcester. He said, "Yes, I can do this," after he looked over the music. And the next morning they had their run-through, and the evening performance was a success. Pavarotti took his bows. Joe was standing quietly and sheepishly in the background. And he looked back to Joe and he said, "You come forward." And Joe wouldn't, so he grabbed him by the hand. They took 3 bows. And Pavarotti said, "Without Joe, this wouldn't have happened tonight." So that was Elvira's husband. So I'm going to continue. As a young lady, Tony's sister, my grandmother, Ida, worked at Fisher's Cash Groceries right along with the Bailey girls. As she walked to work one morning, a young Italian fellow, Frank Mazzio from Revere, was on a construction job in the area and noticed her. He drove that route for several days, and she would consistently hide behind the tree. It's true. And with his persistence, Frank won over Ida, and they would marry in 1926 and raise 3 children. Angela was my mother, her sister Barbara, and Frank Jr. They raised them in the Paleta family home on 104 Main Street. Frank Jr., like his cousins Julio and Joe, would become a noted Millbury High athlete and later a dentist. My mother Angela would own and operate Angela's Beauty Salon in the former Millbury Town Florist space. Does anybody remember that? We're all too young. Her mother Ida was her receptionist, and Ida was also, my grandmother was also employed at the Felters in her early years. She was organist at St. Bridget's for 25 years and served as Millbury Public Schools head dietitian, overseeing the lunch programs for many, many years. And Frank Mazzio, my grandfather, served as Millbury's highway surveyor and personnel manager at the Felters, and was active in many clubs, including St. Bridget's Men's Club, the Kiwanis Club, and the Millbury Old Timers. And one last story here. When my grandparents bought a house at 104 Main Street, the Paleta House, from my grandmother's brother Tony, he went to the Millbury Savings Bank and withdrew $5,000 in cash to pay for the house. He was a highway surveyor. He had the $5,000 in his hand, not in an envelope, just in his hand. It was the beginning of World War II, and with the $5,000, people said, "He's got to be mafia." And so there was word going around that he was part of the mafia, and he was connected with Mussolini, and he lost the election. Things happen. So, getting close to the end, my parents, Harry Bailey and Angela Mazzio, 5 years apart in age, they met in Millbury, the Millbury Public Library, right over here, where my mother's Aunt Laura Paleta and my dad's Aunt Mamie Bailey were both librarians. It was a setup. It was successful too. My mother worked there part-time during her high school years, and on one rainy day, Harry was summoned to pick up Mamie, his Aunt Mamie, and seeing my mother, and she seeing him, it began a relationship that would last just short of 70 years.
I'll stand over there.
After their marriage in October of 1949, they would live at 102 Main Street in the Paleta Mazzio home, of course. In 1953, they would settle in their new home on Boston Road, Sutton, and they would raise 4 children. My older brother Brian, myself, my brother Bradford, and my sister Lisa was with us this evening. Harry and his family would live in the town where his Pierce descendants settled in 1744 on Pierce Road. Although in Sutton, my dad would become trustee of the Millbury Savings Bank, served the town of Sutton as a selectman, a member of the Finance Committee, School and Library Building Committees, and co-founder and president of the Sutton Lions Club. The Sutton Stone that you see on the common of Sutton when you come in from Millbury, with a plaque with a map of the plaque, a map of Sutton on a plaque on Sutton's Common, were donated by my parents in 1962 for the Town Common Restoration Project. The stone came from their backyard. Together, my parents owned and operated Sutton Realty, building several neighborhoods in Sutton during the 50s and 60s. And with many home purchasers being of the Catholic faith, my mother envisioned a Catholic church in the community and contacted Bishop Bernard J. Flanagan to discuss the opportunity. She told my mother, I talked to the bishop today, and she told him what she had shared with the bishop. And she said, Harry, he's calling me back. He's going to call me back. And my father said, Angela, he's not going to call you back. He was just being gracious. You'll never hear from him again. Well, 2 weeks later, he called it back. And he said, let's do this. So after much work on my mother's part, I lost my page 14, but I'll just share this with you. After much work on my mother's part, the church became reality, St. Mark's Church in Sutton. And there is no page 14. I have that there. I can just finish this on my own. So St. Mark's Church became reality. So when I was talking with my dad in the senior years, I asked him, Dad, if you had spent, thank you, if you had spent the same time, if you had stayed in Millbury with the family, would you have done as much in that community, in your home community? He said, of course I would have. I would hope and think I would have. And my mother, she had said to me at one time, several times, she said, you know, Mark, I love Sutton. Sutton is a wonderful place to bring up a family. But me, I always have been and will always be a Millbury girl. And in sharing that with you, I felt a close connection to Millbury as well, because working in the bakery, taking care of my grandparents and my aunts in their elder years, I've always had a close connection with Millbury and found it a very warm community, a very welcoming community, and rich in history. So with that, I'd like to thank, it's been long, I'm sorry, but I'd like to thank the Millbury Historical Society and all of you good listeners. My heartfelt thanks. This has been a true honor to be here tonight, and I will treasure it for the remainder of my years. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mark. That was very interesting. We had a couple of rehearsals, and during rehearsals, it was just like, I couldn't believe the information Mark had, because I really didn't know anything about his family, so it was interesting. I am now going to talk about the Buck brothers. So three brothers of the Buck family grew up in Sheffield, England. John, Charles, and Richard Buck worked as apprentices at a very well-known family shop named the Newbound Edge Tool Factory under their father, who worked under his father. The three of them emigrated to Worcester, Massachusetts in 1853 and officially became the Buck brothers as they set up shop making edge tools out at the Junction Shop on Southwood Street. In 1864, Charles and Richard Buck purchased what was known as the Andrus March Privilege from Dennis Fisher on Dorothy Stream. It was the very first privilege on Dorothy Stream and established what would be famously known as the Riverland Chisel Works. The name was derived from the Riverland River near their hometown. John remained in Worcester as part of Buck and Reeves, later joining his brothers in Millbury as an employee. In 1872, Charles sold his shares of the business to his brother Richard and opened up the Charles Buck Edge Tool Company at 6 Grafton Street in Millbury, the current site of Gosco Metal. Later that year, John died at the young age of 46. So the mill they built was modeled after a church in their native Sheffield, England, the country they loved passionately all their lives. It was beautifully constructed with thick brick walls, sturdy oaken rafters and floors, and a steeple that was topped with a buck's head, proudly rearing its 8-point bronze antlers over Buck's holdings. The steeple portion of the building was impractical but elegant. The goal was to make tools of the highest quality. In 1878, Richard Buck added onto the structure of the original plan a 2-story high brick structure. The Bucks, like other New England manufacturers of their day, solved all transportation and housing problems for 20 families by building 13 white clapboarded little cottages and duplex houses on the 2 streets that flanked their factory, Riverland and Brightside. They were arranged as to form a directive hamlet or a small settlement known as Buck's Village. Both streets were heavily shaded by graceful elms, maples, pines, and white birches. Fronting the factory, a picturesque mill pond made by damming Dorothy Stream, laying between a rounded hill and a rocky peninsula, and was rimmed with giant trees. It was an ideal setting and provided free swimming, fishing, and picnic areas for the generations of villagers. The pond's water spilled down over the dam and water wheel and barreled widely along the mill race between the smooth, high granite walls on over a graceful bridge, then in and out of two other mill ponds before reaching the Blackstone River, a scant mile away. And to there came the skilled workers from Sheffield, Higginbottoms, Platts, Taylors, Ellises, Goodwins, and Cobbs. They all emigrated from Sheffield, England to work and live there. They brought with them, besides their knowledge of their craft, their English accent and old world ways and recipes. Richard and his wife Elizabeth, who came from Manchester, England, took great care of the workers and of the Bucks village. So Richard was a member of the Second Congregational Church. In 1919, the Second Congregational Church merged with the Methodist Episcopal Church that became the Millbury Federated Church, which is shown. He also was a trustee of the Millbury Savings Bank. Charles Buck's business was well underway in 1880 until Richard sued his brother Charles for using the name Buck Brothers. Charles died suddenly in 1905 at a Methodist camp meeting in Sterling Junction, Mass. He was just 76 years old. His company continued to operate until 1915. At that point, William Proctor bought the shop on Grafton Street and reunited it with the original Buck Brothers. The Buck's Head logo was trademarked and stamped into all tools made after 1875. In the centennial history of the town of Millbury, it states, the products of these tool works have become well known, not only in the United States, but also abroad, for the excellent quality of the edged tools produced. Wherever the product of these works have been exhibited in competition with similar products, the edged tools from these works have in every instance secured the first prize for quality and style. The leading expositions in which displays have been made are in Philadelphia in 1876, at Chicago in 1893, and the Buffalo Exposition in 1901. Gold medals were received from Philadelphia and Chicago expositions, and a diploma from the one in Buffalo. The tools of the finest Sheffield steel were produced and fitted with applewood handles made by the Glover Manufacturing Company right here in Millbury. Richard Buck passed away in 1893 at the age of 62 and was one of the wealthiest men in Millbury. His son-in-laws, E.M. Wood and William Proctor, took over the business and purchased it in 1894. Neither brother had a son. William Proctor came here from England and married to Richard's daughter, Sarah. Mr. Proctor purchased Mr. Wood's interest in 1905, thus gaining possession of the entire plant. He was very popular and quoted. One piece of advice that he was quoted far and wide through Millbury, I want you to marry for money, but I'm telling you, to love with his money. The Proctors had 2 sons and a daughter. They eventually divided the authority equally between the 2 sons, Richard Proctor and Harold Buck Proctor. Tragedy struck when Richard, the older son, died in 1916. When the parents passed away, Harold became the sole owner. Harold held to the policy of never selling a flawed product. The old Buck directive still stood fast, break every imperfect tool. The inspection department carried out the law to the letter. His hidden donations to town people in distress was sizable year in and year out. He was quietly kind to everyone. Richard ran such a relaxed shop that if he wanted to attend a baseball game in Boston, he had to use the seat in order to keep his employees at work while he was gone. If he appeared dressed in better clothes, his help waited until the car disappeared down the roadway and then went home to enjoy a peaceful half holiday. So, the only way he could do to get around that is by going to the shop in his work clothes and saying to his bookkeeper, I've got business at the bank, if anyone calls, tell them I'll be right back. So he could be sure that his help would stay at the workbenches. Then only by hurrying home, changing his clothes, could he and Clarence Haywood, the town carpenter, proceed to the Red Sox in action, knowing that his shop was still at work in Millbury. In 1913, a warehouse and storehouse with modern equipment were added to the establishment. As Harold felt old illness closing in on him again, he made an attempt to interest a relative in the family business. When that failed, he quietly sold the white clapboarded cottages and half duplexes to the tenants living in them for $1 each. There was one duplex that was not sold, however. That one on Riverland Street was given to his beloved Federated Church, with the stipulation that the companion of his mother's, Mrs. Elizabeth Ellis, could live there rent-free for the rest of her days. Then when Harold passed away, he also left his mansion on Main Street to the Federated Church. In 1948, almost 100 years as a family-owned business, Buck Brothers was sold to New England Metallurgical Corporation of Boston. And in 1951, Great Neck Saw Company of New York bought the company. Fire destroyed building number 1, the mill with the steeple, on May 8th of 1963. The fire was discovered at 3:40 in the morning by a passerby. It is recorded that the building was all in flames before the alarm was given. So that was the steep business of building of all of the project down there. So Charles Buck is said to have helped the town spiritually. Richard Buck is said to have helped the town financially. Richard's diary is owned by the Massachusetts Historical Society. There's only been 5 general managers of Buck's in the entire history. Richard Buck, Richard Proctor, Joe Port, Gerald Sorda, and Vinnie Allard, who's with us tonight. So in November of 2023, Buck Brothers closed after 159 years in business. The property with 19 acres of land and 3 industrial buildings was sold for $3.5 million. And I want to acknowledge Vinnie because there was no family left in the business, so all of the remnants, all of the stuff that was down there was going to be disposed of, and Vinnie grabbed it all and is going to put it on permanent loan with the Historical Society. And there's some pretty old things. There's a couple of old pictures of Richard and Charles on the desk over there you can look at after. And it's pretty amazing all the things they did for the villagers and how they took care of everybody down there. So, and thank you very much. That's all for me. And Dennis Hill will now talk about the Hill family.
Thank you, Rich. If you were here last year, you heard about part 1, about the family coming over from County Cork across the pond and all the tragedies they had here at that time period. And we're going to start picking up around 1920 now with the second half. And if you remember, I started off with a joke here that the fact that I'm speaking about the Hills tonight, but a lot of my family was here and they also know the story very well also. Except for they're Irish and they were too cheap to buy one of these shirts with the logos. Tonight they are still cheap. So anyway, let's get started where we left off. Tom and Mary Hill, as you know from the first part, Tom married into a lady named Mary. They had a son named Tom. He married a lady named Mary. They had a son named Tom. He married a lady named Mary. And then they had a son named Tom. And he married a Mary. So anyways, Tom and Mary over here on Riverland Street have now purchased a big flat bottom farmland over here on Providence Street, which is starts at 34 Providence Street and would run all the way down to the Millbury sewer beds from the Blackstone River all the way up to Captain Peter Simpson Road. And that would encompass Providence Street, the railroad tracks, Rice Road, up to Captain Peter Simpson Road. It looked like a triangle. It was 64 acres of land approximately. And on the farm, they had all the livestock, they had all the beehives, they had over 100 apple trees on the fields. And the family grew everything they ate, with the exception of flour, sugar, salt, and pepper. Tom Hill would buy 10 barrels of flour in the spring, 10 barrels in the fall. Nana would cook 10 loaves of bread a day for the family. In the barn, they would put 70 tons of hay for the livestock for the winter. And their hay fields was up by St. Bridget's Cemetery, and then around Simpson's Pond, across Providence Street, which was called the Sawmill Field, which went right down to the Blackstone River. And if you know your history, there was a sawmill along the Blackstone River, and the foundation of that sawmill is still there. You can see it sticking out of the water. Tom Hill, he had 9 children on Providence Street. His firstborn was a son named Tom, and there was Diana, John, William, Francis, Charles, Betty, Margie, and David. Now, Tom, Betty, and Francis never married, and they worked the farm. But Francis, he would become cemetery commissioner for the town of Millbury. Now, that leaves 6 more to talk about. Now, I'm going to have the first slide up there already, which I believe it's Jim and Diana. And a lot of people know about Diana Hill. She was a history teacher, first woman selectman. They named the bandstand after her, among the church and the Girl Scouts and the drum corps. But here's a little piece about Diana's private life that a lot of people don't know. Now, according to Bob Leary from Upton Street, Diana Hill almost got married, most likely between 1928 and 1930. The man's name was Jim Dudley, and he worked for the United States Postal Service. That's a nice, good, secure job. And, I guess he wasn't too bad of a looking guy, by the way what they said. And Mr. Leary told me that they met horseback riding. Diana was out riding with Vera Gover. And when they met Jim Dudley, well, he was out for a ride. Things were going on so well for over a 2-year relationship, they went out shopping for furniture and found they could not agree on what to buy. Diana said that if they could not agree on furniture, there was no way that this could work. Diana Hill never married. On the next slide, we have John. John Hill. Can everybody see his middle name? Okay. John Hill volunteered to join the U.S. Navy 64 days after Pearl Harbor was bombed. He left his good-paying, secure job for the U.S. Armed Postal Service. He was assigned to the USS Sargent-Ox. The Sargent-Ox was a PYC. It was a patrol yacht coastal, listed as number 12. It was a yacht that the United States government just bought off a private family and put 430 machine guns on it and 2 depth charge racks. Now, John took me to tell a story how he made money betting against the other sailors if they could guess his middle name, and the bet was for a quarter. Everybody knew his middle initial was E. John never lost because nobody would ever guess. Eusebius. It's 4-syllable word. I can't even pronounce it. But if you can see it on the picture there you go. So that was the story of John. And also, John would have 3 daughters. I'll just mention the part of their family there. And some of them are here tonight. And if anybody was ever here born in Memorial Hospital, pediatrics, his daughter Susan, she probably held you in your hands. She just recently retired just a decade or 2 ago, right Sue? But anyways, and so you had another daughter, Betty Ann, who was an oil artist, not professional. But she painted very, very fine brush. She would do still lifes. She would take blue satin, a mandolin, a large orange, and an empty glass milk bars. And she could paint glass and see the satin in the background and see all the dimples in the orange. She was that talented. Unfortunately, she had arthritis and she would pass away at an early age. Now going on to the next slide here. This will be William Hill. As you can see, he's standing outside of the farmhouse, the big house. Tall, lean, thin guy, lighting up the Lucky Strikes. And there's a gentleman behind him. We believe this was one of the people who were looking to search him to be a candidate for a professional baseball player. Now, Frank, you wanted to hear about Billy Hill because you like sports. Here it is. William Hill, also known as Billy or Uncle Bill. He played baseball for the Blackstone Valley League for 30 years. It was a paid league. He played baseball for 30 years, 1925 to 55. This league was semi-pro, and according to a Worcester newspaper in 1926, reported, when it comes to slinging out and naming the hotbed of baseball in these United States, you can cross off your list such cities as New York, Boston, Chicago, and Detroit. The most red-blooded baseball center in America, inch for inch, soul for soul, is the Blackstone Valley League. Joe Morgan, who played for the Boston Red Sox team, started in the Blackstone League in the late 40s and stated that the professionalism of the playing was above college-level baseball. The players of the Blackstone League were paid well according to the information we found on the internet, and William Hill must have been a very good player to play for 30 years. Now the next slide here This is Billy married a Mary. He wasn't a Tom, but he married a Mary. And this is where the McConnell family comes into the family here. And they would only have one child, a son, but we'll get to that in a minute. Mary McConnell, and I'm going to read this. Mary McConnell, bride, this is a newspaper report. Have you seen her dressed there? Now, how long does it take for a bride to get actually dressed up? Should we have the right slide? Yeah. Good, thank you. How long does it take a bride to get dressed up in this time period? All right, here's a newspaper report. Mary McConnell, bride of William Hill, special to the Post. Millbury, July 29th. Miss Mary McConnell, Providence Street, and William Hill were married at 7 o'clock this morning in St. Bridget's Church by the Reverend George Darcy. During the service, a special musical program was given under the direction of the organist, Mrs. Frank Mazziaro. Following the ceremony, a reception was held at the Hill home, which was decorated in the reception room with white and pink floral arrangements. The bride wore white Mussolino sole with a tulle veil caught up with orange blossoms and white satin. She carried gardenias. The bridesmaids wore a pink gown and white accessories. She carried a colonial banquet. Tom Hill, he just smiled because the father of the bride is traditionally responsible for the expense of the wedding, and he was the father of the groom. Now, on the next slide here, 5 and 6, this is, we're going to be talking about Charles Hill. He's the 6th child of Tom Hill. He's also had 5 children, and this was my father. The pictures that you're seeing here is a picture of one of the first shovels that he bought. It was the second one. And this is a Lorraine Manufacturing Company shovel. It's a 3/4 yard. In other words, it would just about fill one of your small 1-ton dump trucks if you were a contractor doing landscaping. Now, the rumor has it here, Charlie was talking in the garage at Hill Construction about how he was going to see Lorraine. And finally he got back to my mother about for 4 or 5 days this was going on. She never realized that he was actually going out to see a shovel made by the Lorraine Manufacturing Company. Later on in life, when Hill Construction was really getting up and going, the next picture is of a Northwest air-over hydraulic cable system. And this is a 2 3/4 yard shovel. And what shovel is pictured here right now, digging the cellar hole, that is up on Martin Street, and they're digging the excavation for the new Millbury Junior High School. So that's where that was taken. Now, Charlie worked on the farm, learning the construction trade in the family business, which was logging, firewood, stone masonry, granite, digging foundations, and these were the early times. Digging cellar holes with stone foundations with granite tops. For a prime example of this type of foundation work, go down to the center of Millbury. Timothy Sweets is the curved building on the corner. Did the excavation with horse teams, they would cut the dirt with a horse team, they would lay the stone foundation and do the granite work. And that was done by hand. They also bought their first powered dump truck in 1927. That replaced a horse tip cart. Horse tip carts could carry 1 yard. The 1927 truck could carry 1 yard also. But my grandfather could have cried. It made more trips up to Bremenville when they were doing the sidewalks out of concrete than a horse tip cart could do. Plus, the truck only had to be fueled. The horses had to come home at night to be rubbed down, washed down, and fed for the next morning and stored properly. The time that he saved by buying that dump truck, he said, I wish they bought it years ago. Now, in 1928, my father kind of graduated from the 8th grade. He didn't really have a choice. Diana begged my grandfather to say, leave Charlie in school. But to have a good construction work was more valuable than having going for an education, which Diana finally disagreed. But in 1928, at the age of 15, and his 4 brothers, they were building a bridge with their father Tom across the Blackstone River here up by St. Bridget's Cemetery. That bridge then again would be rebuilt during the WPA program, which was very profitable for Hill Construction. Then Charlie started Hill Construction with his brother David in 1945, building roads and bridges, and I'm going to get to that when I get to David on this list. Now, the next picture here, this would be Margie. She was the 8th child of Tom Hill. She would give birth to 7 children. She was the first Hill to do 4 years of college during the Depressions. The Hills family had enough money for that. Also, they had enough money for Margie to go and get her pilot's license. And she received her multi-engine aircraft license for doing 150 hours on multi-engine, and her air license was signed by Charles Lindbergh. Now, Margaret would marry John Maher from Worcester, and they started a real estate agent. Diana later on would get her real estate agent also, and she would sell real estate during the summertime when she wasn't teaching school here in Millbury. After John had passed away, Margaret started her own real estate company in Auburn, and it was called Maher Century 21. And they had a large Century 21 sign, and the office building was right up by the Auburn Mall, if you remember that sign. And then one of her children, Jack, would fly for the Strategic Air Command in Vietnam. And there'll be 4 children in the Hill family that will got their license to fly. Now I'm going to come up, finish up here with David Hill, the 9th child of Tom Hill. And in this picture, David is the top center road. He's the number 6. This is the 1938 semifinals. Some names here that you can't read up there are Armand DeSorcy, Roy St. George, Arthur Crapo, Bill Lang, Morris O'Brien, and Coach Martin Roach. Martin Roach, he was around forever. He was still here back then. Now, David continued on with his education at St. John's in Worcester, prepared to go to Holy Cross, which he did, and he graduated from there. In World War II, he entered the Army Air Corps to be a pilot, same time as Ted Williams was in the Marines as an aviator. He was also the founder of Hill Construction with his brother Charles in 1945, and after being discharged from the service. And now that's where I'll bring in more about Hill Construction there. And they had an awful lot of equipment, and the bridges and roads they would build with jobs like Podunk Road in Charlton, Eastwood Road in Southbridge, ledge roads. Ledge road is where they would blast the ledge and build the roads. And they did that in Lancaster, Gardner, West Boylston, Palmer, Route 140, South Grafton, 146 here in Millbury, Breezy Bend, Route 9 in Worcester, just to name a few. Then they did housing development in Auburn, Central Street, along with Maher Real Estate, 20 homes. Then they did a larger development here in Millbury, a 100-acre housing project, co-development in Millbury with Ben Miles, and it was called Holiday Hills. They did another job in Institute Park, Worcester, a pond they made. They did Worcester Turnpike, Massachusetts Turnpike Authority, and then the Hill family finally took their hay fields around Simpson's Pond and developed that into a housing development. And those are the roads that are called Thomas Hill Road, Aldrich Road, and Captain Peter Simpson Road. It was named for Captain Peter Simpson because he was the carpenter who built the house on Providence Street that Tom Hill bought. And Aldrich, he was the power manager from across the street, and still New England Power today. And that's why Aldrich is named up there also. After that, they would go out and buy 100 acres of gravel pit called Pine Tree Trust in Northbridge. Later, the property was sold to Osman Guard and Heritage Park. And some of the other children in these families in closing here, like I was talking with William and Mary, they had a son named Tom. And Tom would also have a son named Tom. But William's son, Tom, he was working for the United States government down at the Pentagon, and his job requirement was ballistic missiles re-entry. That's what he specialized in, and he was the counterpart to the Chinese that he would meet at the airport. And this is early 60s, and he would show up, he went to Worcester Polytech, and he would show up with his WPI pennant, waving it so the Chinese could see him, in his full-length raccoon coat. That's how he introduced himself to the Chinese. Also, one of the greatest moments in Tom's life was during the Apollo 13 crisis, when it needed the re-entry schedule to land back here on the Earth. That was one of his shining moments, which he was very instrumental with. And that was all done with slide rules at that time period. Computers didn't really exist today, like they did back then. They were very, very small. Another two highlights I would like to note here is also on the Charles family. His third daughter, Charlotte Obin, who had a horrible marriage, and she finally left the state of Massachusetts. She moved to Utah to become a Mormon so she could go to heaven. And while being out there, a man named George Orman hired her to be a nanny to take care of his children. He had 9 children. And the 3 youngest, Charlotte would take care of for the next 5 years. And their names were Donnie, Marie, and Jimmy. And they treated her very, very well. Another highlight in my father's lifetime was my brother Michael. We were watching TV one night when the draft numbers came up. He pulled 26, I pulled 198. And usually the first 80, you were gone. I turned to him and I said, "See ya." And my brother finished up the high school football team, Class C champions in 1970. Went into the military, got the best career education he could. He earned the established Special Forces Green Beret. And when he was going to Vietnam, he was on Fort Bragg runway when Nixon stopped the war. He was on that runway for 4 days waiting to get on the plane to go to Vietnam at that time. So that was Charlie's people there, and Tom's son. What I can say is, right now, I ran a little bit over, but the next speaker has, I believe, a very shallow. Who's the next speaker now?
So, are you done? Are you done? I told him I was going to get a hook and drag him off. Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, that was interesting in the names. Anybody that follows the Red Sox, you see where they called up Roman Anthony, and his brother was there, Anthony, and his father, Anthony. Talk about confusing names. So next up, we have the Stowe family, going to be presented by Lee Stowe Murphy and your son Justin.
Good evening, and thank you to the Millbury Historical Society for inviting us to tell our story here tonight. My name is Leah Murphy, and this is my son Justin Murphy. We are the 6th and 7th generation of Stowes to be growing up at the farm. The 8th generation is very little, but still running around the farm as we speak. We are so happy to be here tonight to tell the story of how Stowe Farm came to be and why it's so important to us and this community. In 1840, Ithamar Stowe, my great-great-great-grandfather, purchased a 120-acre farm from his boss and friend, Amasa Wood, for $1,700. The Salt Box House, one of the oldest in the area, was built in 1742. The large barn was built in 1887 and was called at the time Walnut Grove Farm. In 1874, Ithamar sold the farm to his son George Ithamar Stowe, who was only 21 years old. George Ithamar became the Millbury Grange Master. He belonged to the Millbury Fire Department in 1879 and was a West Millbury Cemetery trustee. George Ithamar was very involved in the town. He was on the investment committee of the Millbury Savings Bank, belonged to the Millbury Farmers Club, and was the Massachusetts agent for a fertilizer company in New York. He was also a very active member of the First Congregational Church in Bremenville. The farm, under George Ithamar and his wife Mary, grew many acres of cabbage and blue Hubbard squash, which was distributed to the Polish community in South Worcester by horse and buggy. George and Mary purchased 84 acres of land from William Davidson in West Millbury in 1881. And in 1898, they purchased 14 acres on Carlton Road as well. In 1915, they bought the town farm, which was located down the hill from Stowe Farm and was 109 acres. This made a total of 327 acres that they owned at the turn of the century. George and Mary had 5 children, all born in the West Millbury farmhouse. George Burton, Elsie, Oscar, Nellie, and Irving. When George Ithamar died, he passed the farm down to his second son, Oscar, as George Burton already owned his own farm. Oscar loved farming. He grew cabbage and blue Hubbard squash. Oscar also decided to buy cows and became a dairy farmer as well. Milking cows was a tedious job. In the early days, they were all milked by hand. The farm always had a few fruit trees going in the field, so in 1920, a storage barn was built. The fruit was stored on the ground floor because it was cooler, and the cabbage and blue Hubbard squash was stored on the top floor. That building is now called the apple cellar, where we keep the apples in refrigeration and run the store from. The top floor now stores everything under the sun. Even an original Surrey with the fringe on top. that has been used at family weddings throughout the years.
Oscar, like his father and grandfather, was also a board member at the Mowbray Savings Bank and a trustee of the West Mowbray Cemetery. He also belonged to the Grange and the Masons. In 1930, Oscar, who ran the farm with the help of his brother Irving and his son George, decided to plant apple trees on the property. He was always coming up with new ideas to keep busy and make money to support the farm and his family. He kept his farm well equipped with every tool and piece of machinery on the market, and definitely had a flair for business. Stowe Farm became mostly an apple orchard and dairy farm under the guidance of Oscar. They no longer planted cabbage and Blue Hubbard squash because they needed the fields for hay and to feed the cows. In 1956, the old barn, which was no longer called Walnut Grove, was torn down under the watchful eye of Oscar, and a new dairy barn was built for the herd of cows. More apple trees were planted, and the farm was very productive and lucrative. Oscar was a hard-working man and loved his family. His wife Alice was a remarkable woman. She loved to cook and fed everyone that came to the farm. Family members in nearby towns often vacationed at the farm and sometimes stayed for weeks at a time. She also took care of the boarders that lived there during apple picking season. She and Oscar made a great pair. Oscar and Alice had 3 children, Carolyn, George Brigham, and Arthur. Both Carolyn and Arthur married and moved from the farm, raising their families nearby. George and his wife Ruth married in 1939, and an addition was built on the main farmhouse for them. George's wife Ruth passed away in 1950 at the age of 34. George lived in the addition with his 2 children, Justin and Amy. His parents, Oscar and Alice, lived in the main area and helped him with the children. After losing Ruth, the farm, his family, and the church became his life. George also worked for Mowbray Savings Bank, was a trustee at the West Mowbray Cemetery, and belonged to the Masons like his ancestors. He was very active in the First Congregational Church, singing in the choir for 65 years. He was a deacon for many years and held positions on other committees throughout many years. As the years went by, George planted more apple trees and eventually sold the herd of cows. He was never really fond of running the dairy farm and was happy to become solely an apple orchard. He worked tirelessly, day in and day out, as farmers do. George raised his children on the farm with the help of their grandparents. After high school, Justin moved to the West Coast. Amy married Dean Peterson from Quinsig Village and stayed on the farm raising their 3 daughters. Her eldest, Deanna, became a nurse and lives on the farm with her family. Her middle daughter, Leah, followed her career out west after college and is now back home, living in Oxford with her husband and son. Mara, the youngest, got the farming gene from her grandfather. She too stayed on the farm, raising her family there. She works as tirelessly as George did. She owns and runs Stowe Farm Stables, where she has over 30 horses that she uses to teach riding lessons and summer camp. Mara also owns and runs Stowe Farm Pet Facility, used for boarding, breeding, and dog training. Mara learned farming from George, but got her business sense from her great-grandfather Oscar. She brought the farm into the 21st century with successful businesses that use the land and its locations to the fullest.
In 1973, when the cows were sold and we became known as Stowe Farm Orchards, a small country store was built in the storage barn, which is now, of course, called the apple cellar. The apples were picked and stored in the cold storage refrigerator at the back of the building. The store was open in the fall months where we sold apples and cider. We also packaged apples to be sold to market and grocery stores. A few years later, we started offering pick your own apples, which was a huge treat for the public. People came from all over with their families to spend the day at the farm. As time went on, the store grew to what it is today. We now offer a large variety of apples, fresh homemade baked goods made by Deanna and Amy, along with jellies, jams, honey, candy, and cider. In the early 1990s, Mara created an area for children of all ages to enjoy during the apple picking months. She started with pony rides, a petting zoo, and a small hot dog stand. Over the years, it has grown into an amazing playland. She is always adding something new and exciting for the families to come back every year. There are pony rides, wagon and hay rides, train rides, a mechanical bull, a sluice for mining for gemstones, and of course a giant pumpkin patch, not to mention the barbecue food truck, the Bad Apple Saloon, and the live music bandstand as well. For the past few years, she even created a holiday festival of lights with Santa and the Grinch. Mara has created a fabulous family fun adventure land for anyone and everyone. After her grandfather George lost his leg at the age of 88, Mara and her dad Dean did most of the farm work. Now she has taken over the farm duties on her own. She sprays the apple trees in the spring, mows the orchards in the fields in the summer, runs the Pick Your Own Orchard and the Adventureland in the fall, along with doing all of her regular duties with the stables, the horses, and the kennel. When George passed away in the fall of 2009, our family was heartbroken. We could not imagine our life without him. He was everything to all of us, and we of course continue his legacy. Amy now is the first woman to own the farm and the farmhouse, and it continues to be the center of all of our lives. Mara has certainly made every one of us proud, especially George. We are blessed and so happy to know that Stowe Farm is still running successfully and in good hands. You can see when you drive by the farm or visit it in the fall that Mara works with pride and passion every day to keep our beautiful farm a wonderful place to call home.
On a small side note, going back to the 1600s, when the first Stowes started their journey to America, John Stowe and his wife Elizabeth were married at All Saints Church in Biddenden, Kent, England in 1608. This past April, when I was studying abroad in Florence, Italy, I decided to travel to England just to find the church and to see where it all began. Biddenden is about an hour and a half south of London. Once I flew into London, I had to take a train and a bus just to get there. Once I arrived, I got to meet and speak with the current priest and was allowed to ring the bell in the steeple. I couldn't believe I was in the church that my ancestors belonged to from birth to burial over 400 years ago.
Nicely done. Another deep-rooted family in Millbury. So our final family is the Pearson family, and it can be presented by Brittany Pearson.
It's an honor to be here today and to share the story of how the Pearson family has been part of Millbury and the dairy industry for over a century. Our journey began long before many of us were born, and it's a story rooted in hard work, resilience, and a deep commitment to the land and the community. Our roots in the dairy industry trace back to 1908, when my great-great-grandfather, John Fellman, purchased property at 342 West Main Street. Back then, it was known as North Oxford Road. At the time, John didn't have much more than a few cows and a vision. He began milking those cows and selling fresh milk to his neighbors. It was a small start, but it was enough to lay the foundation for what would grow into a family tradition. John's vision wasn't just about the business. It was about building a connection with the people around him. In 1927, John's three sons, Carl, Albert, and Edward, took the reins. They saw the potential to expand the operation, and so they acquired the old Holman farm. With that farm, they were able to increase their herd of cows and take the dairy business to the next level. The transition wasn't without its challenges. The world was changing rapidly, and the dairy business was far from easy. But Carl, Albert, and Edward were determined to carry on their father's work. Their work ethic and commitment to quality set the stage for the next generations to continue building upon the legacy. But, as often is the case with family stories, things weren't always smooth sailing. On December 8, 1931, tragedy struck. The barn and house burned to the ground. It was a devastating blow, especially during the Great Depression. But like the resilient people they were, the family didn't give up. They knew they had to find a way to keep the business running. They needed a way to continue selling the milk they were producing. In 1934, John's daughter Esther and her husband Oscar Pearson stepped up. They began pasteurizing and bottling the milk themselves. turning a challenging situation into an opportunity. This wasn't just about keeping the farm afloat. It was also about building something that would allow the family business to survive and grow even during the toughest of times. As part of this new venture, Esther and Oscar expanded the business to include home delivery routes throughout Worcester County. This innovation allowed them to bring fresh, high-quality milk directly to the doorsteps of families, making it even easier for their community to rely on the farm for their dairy needs. In 1985, a new chapter unfolded when Esther and Oscar's son Robert and his wife Barbara purchased the farm. They brought with them new ideas and a vision for expanding the operation. Alongside their 3 children, Robert, Cindy, and John, they worked hard to grow the farm in exciting new directions. Then, in 1987, Robert's youngest son, John, married his wife Fran. They have 2 children, myself and my brother Cody. We both grew up on the farm, continuing our family's deep connection to the land. Today, that connection lives on in new and meaningful ways. I married my husband in 2012, and in 2017 we welcomed our son Gabriel. We live on the farm today, where I work alongside my family, and am proudly passing on the legacy to my son, instilling in him the same love for the land and the family values that have been handed down through the generations. Cody married his wife Erin in 2019, and they recently welcomed their son Connor in 2024. They currently reside in North Carolina. As time went on, it wasn't just about increasing the size of the herd or the scale of dairy production. They also diversified. One of the first additions was a cut-your-own Christmas tree farm, which quickly became a beloved tradition for families in the area. But that was just the beginning. Robert Pearson, with his ingenuity, also expanded into maple syrup production, tapping countless trees and installing many tap lines to produce syrup, which soon became a favorite in homes across the region. In addition to these new ventures, Robert and his family introduced a range of seasonal products, including fresh vegetables and even 26 unique flavors of ice cream. And during the Christmas season, they made eggnog, a festive favorite that quickly became a staple. Even today, Robert and his son John are still out delivering milk to local customers, just as they have been for many years. Their familiar faces on the milk route are a cherished connection to a simpler time and a living reminder of the values this family was built on. Today, the Pearson family continues to operate the farm, and we are proud to carry on the tradition that my great-great-grandfather started over a century ago. While the challenges and opportunities we face today may be different, the spirit of innovation, community, and hard work that started with John Fellman still runs through everything we do. Our farm is not just a dairy anymore. It's a place where families come together to make memories. Whether they're cutting down a Christmas tree, enjoying homemade ice cream, or picking up fresh, locally grown vegetables, we built a true farm experience for the community. As I stand before you today, it's clear that the legacy of our family farm is more than just about the work we do. It's about the connections we've made and the ways in which we've adapted to meet the needs of the community. As we look to the future, we are excited to continue growing and innovating, just as past generations did before us. The legacy we've built together is one of pride, and we're honored to carry it forward, ensuring that the story of our farm will continue for many years to come. Thank you.
Nice job, Brittany. Very good. Another well-known family in town. Does anybody have any questions for any presenters about their families? Questions? No. We want to thank the 5 people that took the time and did the research and put it all together and brought these stories to life, and to Jeff Raymond for doing all the multimedia. We do have one bonus guest here. It's going to come up, Karen Magnan, to step forward, please.
Hi, I am Karen Magnan. I have been a proud citizen of Millbury since I was 3 years old, up in Holiday Hills, which was mentioned today. And I'm here with Shirley Dubois. And we are parts of Hearts and Hands, which is an organization that was started in Millbury a year and a half ago. 4 of the friends of mine who used to be in another community quilting group decided we wanted to start a group where we could actually honor the people in the town who do things for us that are the unsung heroes, and we were asked today to present a quilt. But before I do that, I want to do a little bit about what we are, so that if you know somebody, you can get in touch with us. What we do is we look at people in the community who do things, and we'll just surprise them with a quilt. For example, the fire department got 12 of our quilts for the new station. We have given to other community members. We have our Quilts of Valor organization for our military and veterans. We have, Shirley is part of this knitting and crocheting part, and we have made literally over 4,000 hats and over 100 blankets for local hospitals for the babies. So for a year and a half, we've done pretty good. So when we were asked today to present a quilt to somebody, it was, yeah, absolutely, who is it going to be for? And when they said who it was going to be for, I was like, oh, I graduated with his son. Oh, I've been to his farm, and we've had that vanilla ice cream drizzled with the maple syrup. Oh, Bobby did take pictures of me stuck in the mud trying to get my car out. Laughing. I thought he was getting me help. He was getting a camera. Just to say. So what we did when we found out that Bob was being honored tonight, the Pearson family was being honored, we decided to go whimsy with the quilt. So with the help of Shirley, this quilt was made specifically for Mr. Pearson, and if you're able to come up here, Mr. Pearson, I would like to present it to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here. I don't know what else you'd like to say. I don't have the voice I used to have, because I was a soloist in many of the churches for years. But I went to the hospital some 2 or 3 years ago, put a breathing tube down my throat. And they hit the nerve and paralyzed my left vocal cord. So I can't sing anymore, which I'm disappointed. But anyway, I enjoy being here. Nice to see everybody. So many good friends that I've known for years. So thank you again. Good night.